My parents gave my brother a check for $50,000 on a Tuesday afternoon, and I found out about it on a Wednesday, when my mother called me to brag. Not to tell me. To brag. Your brother is finally doing something with his life, she said. We're so proud of him. I was 23 years old, sitting in my car outside the grocery store where I worked, eating a gas station sandwich because I couldn't afford lunch anywhere else. My name is Theo. And for as long as I can remember, I have been the wrong son. Let me back up. Growing up, my brother Vince and I were 2 years apart. He was older, and from the time I was old enough to understand how families worked, I understood that ours had a system. Vince was the one my parents talked about at dinner. Vince was the one whose little league games my father never missed. Vince was the one my mother called her heart. I was just there. I don't say that to sound dramatic. I say it because it's the most accurate thing I know. I wasn't abused. I wasn't neglected in any way that would show up on paper. I was fed, clothed, driven to school, but there is a specific kind of invisible that happens inside some families, and if you've lived it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's the birthday that gets a small cake while your siblings gets a party. It's the way a parent's eyes light up when one child walks into a room and go flat when the other does. It's 1,000 tiny moments over 18 years that add up to a message you never asked to receive. You are not the favorite, and you never will be. I spent most of my childhood trying to change that. I got good grades. Vince barely passed. I made the honor roll junior year. My mother said, "That's nice," and hung Vince's participation trophy from soccer on the refrigerator next to my report card. I started working at 16 to save money. My father told me it was good that I was self-sufficient. He never asked why a teenager needed to be self-sufficient. He never thought about what it meant that I was buying my own school supplies while he paid for Vince's new gaming setup. By the time I was applying for college, I had already accepted a certain reality. I applied to 3 schools. Got into 2. The one I actually wanted to go to would have cost about $18,000 a year. I sat down with my parents the spring of my senior year and asked if they could help. My father looked at me the way he always looked at me when I asked for something, like I was presenting him with a problem he hadn't budgeted for. "You're capable," he said. "You've always been capable. You don't need us holding your hand." My mother nodded. She was good at nodding. "Your brother is going to need support," my father continued. "He struggles more than you do. You're stronger." That was the answer. Not a no, exactly. More like a redirection. A reminder that my strength was actually my disadvantage. That being capable was my punishment for being capable. That because I could figure things out, I was expected to figure things out, so that they could save their energy for Vince. I remember sitting very still in that chair and feeling something close down inside me. Not a dramatic closing, not a door slamming, more like a window, very quietly, in an empty room. I said okay. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I got up, went to my room, and started researching loans. I want to be clear about something because I think it matters. I recorded that conversation, not because I planned to do anything with it, but because I had learned, over years of small invisible moments, that my parents were very good at rewriting history, at somehow remembering things in ways that were more comfortable for them. I wanted one thing I couldn't doubt later, one thing I could hold in my hands when the memory started to blur. I took out loans. I worked 25 hours a week during the school year and full-time every summer. I ate a lot of rice and beans my sophomore year when the loans didn't cover everything and I was too proud to call home. I graduated in 4 years with a degree in civil engineering and $41,000 in debt. My parents came to graduation. My mother cried. My father shook my hand and said he was proud of me. I remember thinking that pride, from him, felt like being handed a trophy for a race you ran alone. Thanks. But you weren't watching when it mattered. The $50,000 happened 3 years after that. Vince had this idea. A bar. Sports-themed. He'd been talking about it for years, and that way Vince talked about things. Loudly, enthusiastically, without any of the infrastructure that makes an idea real. He'd never run a business. He'd never done anything really, other than float through his 20s on my parents' goodwill and the easy confidence of someone who has never been told he's too much trouble. My mother called me on a Wednesday and told me about the money like she was telling me about a vacation they'd taken, casually, gleefully almost. "We're so excited for him," she said. "This is really his moment." I was quiet for a second. Then I asked the question I already knew the answer to. "Did you ever think about helping me with school?" She paused. "Theo, you always figured things out. You never needed us like Vince does." There it was again. The same sentence, just slightly older. I told her I had to go. I sat in my car for a while. Then I went back inside and finished my shift. That was the moment I stopped waiting. I think I had been waiting my whole life without realizing it, waiting for them to notice. Waiting for them to ask how the loans were going, or how work was, or whether I was okay. Waiting for the moment they would look at me and see what they'd done, and feel something about it. After that phone call, I was done. I didn't cut them off. That's not who I am, but I stopped performing. I stopped driving 3 hours for holidays I didn't want to attend. I stopped calling on birthdays with the same warmth I'd given them for years while they gave me a fraction of it back. I was cordial. I answered texts. I showed up at Christmas for a few hours and left before dinner. They didn't notice for almost a year. Or maybe they noticed and didn't say anything. With my family, it's hard to tell. The years that followed were hard in the way that building something always is. Hard in a way that has a point to it. I paid off my loans. I got promoted twice. I met someone, her name is Mara, and she is the first person in my life who has ever looked at me like I am exactly enough. And we built a life together. We bought a house. We had a daughter. We named her June because Mara loved the sound of it and I loved watching Mara happy. I didn't think about my parents much during those years. Or I tried not to. When I did, it was usually at odd moments, folding laundry, or driving to work, or watching June sleep. Moments when something quiet settled over everything, and it was nothing to distract from the thing underneath. The thing underneath was grief, I think. Grief for the parents I should have had. Grief for the version of my childhood that could have existed but didn't. I never told Mara the full story. Not because I was hiding it, but because I didn't know how to explain something that had no single event at its center. How do you tell someone about an 18-year accumulation of being made to feel like an afterthought? There's no story. There's just a feeling you carry. She figured it out eventually. She's smart like that. Your parents talk about Vince differently than they talk about you, she said one night carefully. I know, I said. Did they treat you differently? I thought about the check, the graduation handshake, the chair in the kitchen where I sat and heard my capability used against me. Yeah, I said. They did. She reached over and held my hand. She didn't try to fix it. I loved her for that. Vince's bar lasted 14 months. He called me when it closed. Actually, the first real conversation we'd had in probably 2 years. He wasn't asking for anything, to his credit. He just sounded tired and small, in a way I'd never heard him sound before. We talked for a while. I didn't say anything about the money. He didn't either. We said we'd get together soon, knowing we probably wouldn't. My parents lost a chunk of their savings on that bar. My mother mentioned it once, in passing, in a way that suggested she expected sympathy. I gave her something non-committal and changed the subject. The event that I am building toward happened last spring. My father turned 70. My mother had been planning the party for months. She mentioned it every time we talked, which was not often, but often enough. A big dinner. Vince was flying in. Extended family. The house decorated. She wanted it to be special. I almost didn't go. Mara and I talked about it for a long time. She didn't push me either way. She just asked me what I wanted, which is a question I'm still not always sure how to answer when it comes to my family. What I wanted was for things to be different than they were, since they weren't going to be. I didn't know what I wanted. In the end, I went, partly because June is old enough now to know her grandparents and I didn't want my history with my parents to become hers. Partly because there was something in me that needed to go. Some last holdout of the child who kept trying. We drove the 3 hours. Pulled up to the house I grew up in. Mara squeezed my hand before we got out of the car. The party was already in full swing when we arrived. Extended family I hadn't seen in years. My uncle and his wife. Cousins. 2 of my parents' old friends, Jim and Patty, who had known us since we were kids. Vince was holding court in the living room, the way Vince always held court. Loud and easy and magnetic in the way people are when they've never been made to feel small. He clapped me on the shoulder when I walked in. "Little brother," he said, like we'd seen each other last week. My mother hugged me briefly and immediately turned to June. "There she is," she said, in the voice she reserves for June, which is warmer than any voice she has ever used with me. I watched my daughter light up under my mother's attention and felt something complicated move through me. Joy that June ought to feel that. Grief that I hadn't. Dinner was fine. It was the kind of fine that takes effort, where every conversation is managed slightly, where no one says the real thing. Afterward, in the living room, my father started what I can only describe as a speech. He was a little warm from the wine. He talked about his life, his work, his family. He talked about how proud he was of Vince. He talked about the bar, with more generosity than I would have expected, given what it cost him, and said that Vince had shown courage by trying. He talked for a long time. Then he turned to me. "And Theo," he said, and something in the room shifted. Theo never needed us. He was always going to be fine on his own. He said it like it was a compliment. Jim, my parents' old friend, looked up from his drink. He was the kind of man who had spent 40 years watching people and had very little patience left for pretense. "That's a funny thing to be proud of," he said, "that you never had to show up for one of your kids." The room went quiet. My father blinked. "I didn't mean it that way." "I know you didn't," Jim said. He wasn't angry, he was just even, but that's how it came out. My mother started to say something. Jim's wife Patty touched my mother's arm gently, and she stopped. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. I just sat there and felt something happening inside me that I don't have a perfect word for. Not vindication exactly, not satisfaction. Something quieter, something like being witnessed, finally, by someone who owed me nothing. The party ended not long after. There were hugs, some more stiff than others. My father didn't bring it up again. Neither did I. We said goodbye at the door, and he held June for a minute before we took her to the car. On the drive home, Mara asked me how I was. "I'm okay," I said. "Really?" I thought about it. "Yeah," I said. "I think actually okay." June fell asleep in the back seat about 20 minutes in. I drove and Mara leaned against the window and neither of us felt the need to fill the silence. That's one of the things I love most about her. She knows when silence is the right thing. I have not received an apology from my parents. I want to be honest about that. I don't expect one now. My father is 70 years old and has been telling himself a certain story about his parenting for that long. And I don't think Jim's comment at dinner is going to rewrite 30 years of narrative. People don't usually let themselves feel the full weight of what they did to someone they love. It's too heavy. It's easier to say, "You were always so strong," and believe that strength absolves you of the choice not to support it. But here's what I know. I know that June is 3 years old and has never once been in a room with me and felt invisible. I know that when she does something, anything, draws a picture, learns a new word, trips, and gets back up, I look at her the way I always wanted to be looked at. Like she is the most interesting person in any room she walks into. Like she is enough, always, without having to earn it. I know that I paid off every dollar of debt I took on for a degree my parents didn't pay for, and I built a career and a home and a family with my own hands, and none of it was handed to me, and I used to think that was the sad part of my story. I don't anymore. I know that I had a recording of a conversation in which my parents told me I was strong enough not to need them, and I kept it for 12 years, and I have never needed to use it, because it turns out the truth doesn't need a recording to survive. It just lives in you. It knows what it knows. And I know that somewhere between that kitchen chair at 18 and the car ride home last spring, I stopped being the wrong son and started being the right father. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. If you are watching this and you know what it is to be the child who was handed independence instead of support, who is called strong because it's easier than being called overlooked, I want you to hear this. You didn't imagine it. The math was never fair, and the fact that you survived it, that you built something anyway, doesn't mean you deserved what you were given. It means you were more than what you were given. You get to know that. You get to let that be enough. I thought a lot about what Jim said that night. Not because it was dramatic. It wasn't really. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. He just said the quiet thing out loud. The thing that had been sitting in the room for 30 years without anyone naming it. And I've thought about why it landed the way it did. Why something that small could feel so significant? And I think the answer is this. The truth doesn't need volume. It just needs one honest person willing to say it. That's something I didn't understand when I was younger. When I was sitting in that kitchen chair at 18, hearing my father tell me I was strong enough not to need them, I thought the only way to make the truth matter was to argue it, to prove it, to line up every small injustice and make someone account for it. I didn't do that, partly because I was too tired, and partly because I think I knew, even then, that it wouldn't work. You can't make someone see what they've decided not to look at. So I built instead, not out of spite. Spite is exhausting, and it costs more than it gives back. I built because there was nothing else to do, and because somewhere underneath the quiet grief of being the overlooked son, there was something in me that still wanted a life worth having. That's not a virtue I'm claiming. It's just what happened. You keep moving or you don't, and I kept moving. What I understand now at 31 is that the choices my parents made had consequences they didn't plan for. Not punishment. I don't believe the world works that cleanly. But consequence, yes. When you treat one child as self-sufficient and the other as fragile. You teach the self-sufficient one to live without you. You practice making yourself unnecessary, and then you wonder why your son drives 3 hours and leaves before dinner. The distance I kept from my parents wasn't a decision I made in anger. It was the natural result of $40,000 in loans and a handshake at graduation and a phone call where my mother bragged about giving Vince money she never offered me. Actions build the shape of a relationship over time. That shape, eventually, is just what's true. What I also understand is that intelligence without character is just cleverness in a nice suit. My parents are not stupid people. My father built a decent career. My mother ran a household and raised 2 kids and managed more than most people know. But wisdom isn't the same as intelligence, and wisdom requires something harder. The willingness to look at yourself clearly, without flinching, and ask whether you are being the person you intend to be. That question takes courage. A lot of people go their whole lives without asking it. I ask it about myself when I look at June. I ask it when I'm tired and she needs something, and I feel the pull toward impatience. I ask it because I know how much the small moments accumulate. I know that a child is not keeping score exactly, but they are keeping something, a running sense of whether they matter, whether the room changes when they enter it, whether love in their family is given or earned. June will never have to wonder. That is the one thing I am most certain I am getting right. Mara said something to me once, not long after the party, when I was still turning the whole night over in my mind. She said, "You spent your whole life proving something to people who weren't watching. And then you just stopped needing them to watch." She was right, that's what happened. And the stopping, the real stopping, not the performative kind, that's the hardest work I've ever done. Harder than the loans, harder than the promotions, harder than any of it. Letting go of the audience you never asked for, but spent years performing for. Anyway. Deciding that the life you built is real, whether or not the people who should have built it with you ever acknowledge it. I still don't have an apology. I'm not holding my breath, but I have June asleep in the back seat of a car, and Mara leaning against the window, and 3 hours of quiet road ahead of me, and that is enough. That has always been enough. I just had to be willing to let it be.